Hey, it's Paul. Before we get started, we need to make sure that you, the listener, knows that we are not mental health professionals and not qualified to prescribe therapies or therapeutic advice. We are also not your gurus and have no aspirations in that direction. We are simply two people who are trying to feel better and do better in our lives, just like you. And now, on with the show.
P. Dizzle, what's happening?
What's happening, Sweaty Palms? How are you?
Good. What's that? What's the deep?
What do you think? What do you think it is? I'm calling. It's your turn to come up with a topic for the podcast. What are you thinking this week?
All right. I've been thinking about it. I think we should cover altered states of mind.
Altered states of mind. I like it. What do you got in mind for that? Like what?
Like maybe you can talk about some of your psychedelic trips, and we can talk about cannabis and the sound bath that I did.
So
talk about what we did.
All right. So basically, we're going to out ourselves as the reefer toking, acid dropping, mushroom chewing, godless beatniks that we are. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Sounds great. I'm into it. See you Tuesday.
Sounds good. Well, I'll talk to you then. All
okay.
Right?
Bye.
As long as we've had consciousness, we have tried to alter it. From plant medicine to tribal rituals to meditation, we humans have always sought to explore our inner space as much as our outer.
Today on the show, we're talking about altered states of mind, from cannabis to psychedelics to sound baths and more. We will unpack each of these experiences, tell you what we've learned from them, and how we've integrated those lessons into our lives. So if you're ready for takeoff,
let's go.
Okay, Nora, today we are talking about altered states of mind and our experiences with them. I feel like we should probably say at the top that we are not versed in every facet of this topic, and we're only really going to discuss what we have direct experience with.
Yeah, that's definitely the truth. I do not have as many experiences with altered states, as we'll call it, as you do, Paul. But the point is to give our listeners an idea of what we've done and how it has or hasn't helped us so they can make more educated choices about their own journey with altered states. We should also say that we're not recommending or advocating for people to take drugs. We're not doing that. That may be fine for the vast majority of people to do, but please educate yourself on the risks so you're making the safest and most informed decisions about your health.
For sure.
We don't want anyone put in any unsafe situations.
That is the last thing we would want, and make sure you do your research first, because there are contraindications with some of these substances that you may be interested in taking.
Yeah.
And you need to know what those are, especially if you have schizophrenia or if you're on an SSRI or anything like that. Make sure you check it out thoroughly and not just take some YouTube psychonauts,
That's, I was just about to say that.
Word for
when
it.
we say research, it's not Google or YouTube University.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, actually go check it out, okay?
Yeah, or Reddit.
All right. Well, let's get into it here. We're going to start with a non-drug altered state here, which is meditation. I wanted to start here because it's 100% free. I can do it anytime I want to, and it has profound effects on my day-to-day. And also a lot of people have trouble sitting still and focusing their attention. Everybody, non-meditators that I talk to are like, I can never meditate. I'm like, I can't sit for that long, or I just can't still my mind or whatever. But that is the point. So I thought we'd start with the meditation aspect of everything, so we could kind of maybe make people feel more comfortable about actually what it is as well, and what it's not.
And I fully agree with that. And those are some of the conversations I've had with people who do not meditate, or at least regularly.
Yeah.
So we'll dive into that. But Paul, when did you start meditating?
I started meditating when I was a kid, but I didn't really know I was meditating. That's the funny thing. Well, I've always liked.
Did your parents play the who can be the quietest? No, is that what it was?
No.
I mean, me neither.
It's a thin line between punishment and meditation, everybody. No. It's not. No, it's nothing like that. It's nothing like that. I was always kind of a contemplative kid, but I grew up in the 70s, right? So it was in the early 70s when I was little. Alan Watts was still on the radio, and we were just a few years removed from the Summer of Love, and my family had all dabbled in Eastern philosophy. I wouldn't say any of my family were hippies or anything like that. They're a little too old for that, but they've dabbled. They would read like, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, or the Tao of Pooh. I'd find things like that around the house. So you might guess I was sort of in a supportive environment for meditation practice to begin with. Many of my
Yeah.
family members did, although I wasn't taught formally to do it. But I wouldn't say, however, that I followed a traditional path of meditation practice. My grandfather was a psychiatrist and a pioneer in biofeedback research, which is now called neurofeedback, and we're going to talk about that in a
Yep.
little bit. But
Yep.
my introduction to meditation was sort of as a test subject for him at first. He would hook me up to the EEG, and he had a set of audio tapes that were designed to help you alter your brainwaves and sync into different meditative states like alpha, delta, theta states. So I didn't really know I was meditating. I just knew it was fun to do. It was fun to hang out with my grandfather. It was fun to put weird stuff on my head with saline solution and things like that. And it was fun to listen to these tapes. And I had some really profound experiences when I was a kid, although I couldn't really explain them and didn't know that I was meditating. But actually what I was doing is a form of deep meditation. So I didn't do sitting meditation until my early 20s, really, and start to have a practice. And that practice has gone on and off over the years, and which is
Right.
natural. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But how about you, Nora? When did you start to meditate?
It's just interesting listening to you tell me about your childhood. It's just so different than mine.
Yeah.
You're like growing up in the Bay Area and the like kind of not even, I wouldn't even say post hippie era, but, and meanwhile I'm on the East Coast in the Philadelphia area and growing up in, with the Irish Catholic family.
Yeah.
So
Pretty different.
very different,
Yeah.
very different. I'll say that, I went to Catholic schools my whole life. So there was versions of meditation that were like, my mom is a devout Catholic, as was my dad. I am a recovering Catholic, as I would put it, but the whole rosary really is, like the practice of praying a rosary is a meditation of sorts. So
Yeah.
I guess in that term, I was introduced to meditation, but really when it comes to my daily meditation practice, which doesn't, equate in a religious context, it's more of a spiritual. I really started that on a daily basis around when I started chemotherapy. And that's because I was beyond anxious. I mean, I had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I had major abdominal surgery and then had to recover from that and then went into aggressive chemotherapy and at 39 years old. So at that time I didn't know how to cope. There was nothing there to help me, to anchor me. And so I just started diving into sitting down every day for 10 minutes and just getting quiet and trying to listen into what I needed.
Yeah.
And I'll say that that was in 2015 and I rarely miss a day since then. And I find that if I don't meditate in the morning, I'm like, my brain is scattered.
Same with me. Yeah. Same with me.
Yeah, it's a noticeable difference for me.
Yeah, for sure. I've had trouble sitting in the past week. In fact, a couple of times I've my body just wants to get up, and I'm you go with it and you try to be kind to yourself about it. But I do miss it though when I skip a day or when it's a big difference. Yeah.
I find that the anxiety that I can create in myself, I guess, it really, if I don't meditate every day and really do that, check in with myself, that I can go into an anxiety loop real quick without realizing it.
Yeah. I love it because I love meditation because it allows me to create sort of a space between input and output. And that's real important for me because in the past I've been reactive, at times in my life,
Me too.
and it's much better to have that space in there so you can actually, approach life with some kind of equanimity. And I think that's a worthwhile pursuit to just for that, and I try to get in 30 minutes a day, but sometimes I'll sit for an hour, but that's kind of rare these days. Like I said, meditation's always been up and down for me. I think it's true for a lot of people. If you're just a normal person and not a monk or anything, I think you go through waves with it. In some periods of my life, I was sitting a couple hours a day, and that was awesome. But I also had a couple hours a day to sit. Sometimes it was just 10 minutes twice a week. Less than every day. It's whatever you can manage. And like I said before, it's important that you just don't make a chore out of it. Don't make it punishment in your mind. Don't make it a chore like, oh, I got to go meditate now or whatever. You don't have to do anything. Go choose it. When you do it, choose it, and then don't get down on yourself if you're not able to do it. If you have to pull
Yeah.
out and there's just too much going on and you can't stay in it, fine. It's supposed to be about getting your mind in order. And so don't add a bunch of your own bullshit judgments on top of that.
Yeah.
It is not a competition, people.
Right. I just want to address a few things for anyone listening that doesn't meditate or just has
Yeah.
thinks that they can't meditate or anything like that. First off, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about meditation.
hmm
And the first is that like, oh, you're not supposed to think anything. You're supposed to have a blank mind. And I mean, that's rare where that happens.
Nobody can do that.
And that's not it.
No.
It's essentially, I remember getting to the point where I started to understand what meditation, the benefits of meditation, and what it was doing for me, where I finally got what it meant to detach from my thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I used to think that my thoughts were who I was.
hmm
And with meditation, I think the really interesting thing about it is you have a thought, but you can observe the thought, right? And so it's like, who is the thought then? Who's generating the thought and who is observing? So for those two things. And so when I meditate, I can, because I do it every day and it's a practice, I can get in a better sense more often of when I'm like in observant mode rather than thought reactive mode. And the interesting thing about meditation is the practice has allowed me to observe that. And so when I notice I'm thinking shitty thoughts,
hmm
I have a lot more compassion. And then I'm like, wait, I don't want to, that doesn't empower me.
Yeah.
So I can choose a different thought,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I have
I
that same
replace
thing.
that
Yeah.
thought. So that's,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that has benefited me so drastically in my life. Like I don't know what I would do without having that ability.
Yeah.
I would be miserable.
Yeah, like I said, it's amazing in your day to day. And I just want to reiterate what you said though about it is not about clearing your mind of thoughts. That is
Mm-mm.
that is an impossibility. You cannot do it unless you're dead. Your mind is a thought generating machine. It just goes
Right.
and goes and goes. And
That's what it does.
what it does is what you said. It removes you to an observer's viewpoint, so you can see your mind making all that mess. And then you can
Right.
actually, the large S self, can actually make decisions about what you're going to believe, what you're not going to believe, what you're going to take on, what you're not going to take on. And that's the whole
Exactly.
point. It's not to become some Zen master on on a
Mm-mm.
mountain somewhere and having just completely serene all this. That's not. None of that's going to happen. All right. That's not what.
Right.
That's not what enlightenment is
Most
anyway.
likely.
Most
Right.
likely, that's
Right.
not. That's not what it is anyway. So just relax. Your only thing that you need to do is sit. That's it. And then when you have a thought, you just label it thought. That's all. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. That's like that's the guy who wrote Shambhala, the Trungpa Rinpoche, who wrote a book on meditation. He wrote a lot of books on meditation. But that's basically his technique. You just sit, and then when you have a thought, you just label that as thought, and then you just let it go by. You just let them pass you.
Yep.
Thich Nhat Hanh used to just be like, they're just clouds in the sky. Your thoughts are all just clouds in the sky.
Yeah.
Just watch them go by.
I
that's
had
it.
this little way of of describing. You ever go to like a sushi restaurant where it's like the sushi
Yeah.
boats that go by? You can
Yeah,
choose.
yeah.
Think of like observing when you're in meditation, your thoughts are kind of like the sushi boats
For
going
sure.
by, and some of the sushi is like it looks like it's like 3 weeks old
Yeah.
and not great for you. And if you like basically engage with it, you're gonna puke.
Yeah.
And then there are like the fresh sushi. Like I think of it in that way. Like which sushi?
Which sushi do I want to
the
eat?
thought is-
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I want to eat the delicious,
Right.
freshly made sushi, and those are the thoughts that are the ones that are going to empower me. And
Yeah.
so it's like I think of it like that.
Yeah, I find that no
It's
matter
ridiculous, but
no matter what you go in with, my goal a lot of the time is just not to engage with either of it. Don't engage with the good stuff. Don't engage with none of it.
Mhm.
Don't engage with any thoughts as if they're real. And
yeah, but I'm hungry.
well, there is that. I often
know.
find though, once I label it as a thought, or once you label it as sushi, do you then even forget what that thought was the next second along? Because that happens to me all the time. As soon as I label something thought and I say I'm not going to attach to this, okay, that's just a thought. When it goes, I don't remember it for more than a couple seconds, and I'm like, I don't remember any of those thoughts that I had in meditation. So it just goes to show how much bullshit your mind makes up all the time. Just like,
All day.
and it's just
Every day.
nonsense. It's just nonsense stuff,
Well, and that's the thing. I think for people who really attach to their thoughts, it seems to me like a fresh hell.
Oh, it's a
And,
living
like,
hell for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have the whole inner monologue thing that people claim to have. Like
Mm.
I usually my thought process comes up in like visual or like glimpses of things or emotion.
Yeah.
I don't,
Interesting.
but like I've had people tell me that they're like their inner voice, they're like, oh my God, it's exhausting and it drives me crazy. But I really do think that like just sitting and observing that and like just trying to build that practice could really help people
Yeah.
who experience that kind of inner
Now,
monologue.
I am someone who does have a strong inner voice like that talks all the time. And what I
Mhm,
found with meditation and a lot of other things like compassion practice and all that stuff like that
mhm.
you need to make a friend of that voice inside
Yeah,
of you, because that voice can
yeah.
turn on you, and like you said, it can be exhausting.
It can be
But
a real dick.
yeah, but through meditation and everything, you can
Mhm.
get to making that voice much calmer, much slower, and much more supportive of you if you
Yeah.
you know if you work on it. Yeah, very good.
Meditation, man. If you're not doing it, just like set a timer 5 minutes.
Yeah,
5 minutes.
yeah.
Do it with your coffee. Like just sit down and as quiet as possible and just observe.
Yeah, you don't have to
That's
sit
it.
cross-legged,
Without
anything like
judgment.
that. You sit in a chair,
No.
right? That's the other thing. If you're older, like a lot of us don't want to get it down on the ground, right? It might hurt your knee to
Mm-mm.
sit even crisscross applesauce, right? You want you
Nope.
not to mention full lotus position. So don't do that. Sit in a chair. Just relax
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, there's lots of good guided meditations on YouTube and everywhere else that you don't have to
Yeah.
pay for as well. If you need help going along,
Yeah. I'm a
they're
fan
all
of
good.
Insight Timer. I use that every day.
That's
And
cool.
yeah.
Insight
So,
timer.
and that's free.
Yeah, that's great. Insight
Good stuff.
Timer. There you
Right.
go. You hear that, Insight
Shall we
Timer? If
move
you want to
on?
sponsor the podcast, Insight Timer, we're
Yeah, there
already
you go.
advertising your stuff. There you go. Okay, looking forward to that. Yeah, let's move on. Let's move on to cannabis, one of
All
my
right.
one of my favorites.
You put your weed in it,
But-
man.
yeah, the devil's lettuce. Gotta be smoking
Yeah.
those jazz cigarettes in this corner over there.
Jazz
Those some of
cabbage.
those jazz cigarettes. Okay, let's talk about it. So I did not like cannabis when I was younger. Like I was not a
Mhm.
stoner in junior high school or high school or
Me
anything like
neither.
that. I was
Yeah.
way at the other end of the spectrum. Um, I was much more into like speed and alcohol when I was a
Oof.
child. So weird, man.
That is Gen X
But
AF,
it is
dude.
Gen X AF. When I was a kid, I was way more into Coke and booze,
Yeah,
and
when I
then
was
I
5.
matured. When I hit my 20s, what are we talking about? Do we hear
Hey,
ourselves? Oh my
I'm not
God.
gonna even. You know what? I grew up in bars,
Yeah,
so
I know.
there's
It's
that.
insane. I mean, all of our childhoods are
Shit,
insane. So shout out to Gen
our
X.
parents would be arrested
Yeah.
by today's
Totally.
standards. But
Yeah, we
anyway,
would have been
yeah,
taken into
100%.
care, no problem.
Yeah,
All right. So anyway,
absolutely.
so these, the stuff I was into, or the drugs with no redeeming value that I was trying to trying to patch a hole in my soul with, basically.
Mm,
And it wasn't
yeah.
until I was suffering from depression in my early 40s that in desperation, I decided to try cannabis again, because I was on an SSRI and I was also on a benzodiazepine for,
Mhm,
my depression and anxiety respectively. And I wanted off both, because basically
mhm.
through, I had a very bad therapist at the time as well, a psychiatrist. Didn't really talk to me about all the dangers of addiction with benzodiazepines, and I have
Oh,
addictive
yikes.
personality, right? So I ended up
Mhm.
hooked on them and got off, luckily. But so I sought out. I was desperate, and I sought out. One of the guys in my band was a big, huge stoner, and I was like, maybe I should try that. So I asked him for some. I was like, this could be all right, because it just slowed me
Mhm.
down enough. I'm not saying it's a panacea, and it's not for me anyway. And a lot of the strong advocates for cannabis legalization and everything would have you believe it cures everything from
What's
athlete's
up,
foot
Snoop
to,
Dogg?
yeah. Yes, not like Snoop Dogg. No, he's cool, but the people who work for Normal and stuff like that. It's all
Yeah.
fine, right? And not that there's nothing wrong for that for some people, but the drugs. I mean, the drugs
Mhm.
I was on before. There's nothing. I want to say that there's nothing wrong with SSRIs. I know many people who are on them. There's nothing
Right.
wrong with anxiety medication. For me, I was saying I needed to get off this stuff, because
Right.
the SSRI I was on was making me gain weight. It was making me feel very disconnected from everything else, and just everything was very gray, and with that.
Yeah.
And then the benzo was, of course, it was great, because benzodiazepines are great, for a minute,
Mhm.
until you're hooked on them. And then, you got to get off. So I decided to try weed, and it gave me some space in my thoughts when I really needed it. And it gave me some relaxation so I could sleep. I also wasn't sleeping very well. I
Mhm.
had a very high pressure job at the time. And, it was a great stopgap measure. So I could sort of it kind of led me get back into a sitting meditation practice, to get back into reading, to kind of, get away from my own horrible thoughts at the time, and just give me some space in between me and them so I could actually observe a little bit. Where, I don't know, I was so depressed and so anxiety ridden. I'm not sure that I could have just done it with sitting meditation. I probably could have, but it probably would have taken a long time.
Took a lot.
And I said, I didn't have a good therapist at the time either. So that probably would have helped a lot in that direction. But cannabis, it was great. And I still use it today. I use it mostly recreationally and to sleep. Sometimes before if I'm doing an afternoon meditation, maybe I'll smoke a little bit, but because it does a different thing for me in meditation.
Right.
And it's a great creative partner for me, I think, when I'm making things with my hands or cooking or drawing. So that's how I use it now. Yeah. How about you?
Right. Yeah. So outside of experimenting with weed in high school, college, young 20s, here and there, nothing regular. Like, I had friends who were like wake and bake
Me too.
in college and
Yeah.
stuff. And,
Yeah.
and I really have no judgment on that either. But I think just the fact that I grew up around alcohol abuse,
Yeah.
and some of my peers, both in high school and in college, went to rehab for like some different harder drugs. Like, it just basically, I was like, I'm learning to let go, but my control freak side was just hyper alert of, just not relying on anything, essentially, to, I don't know, relieve anxiety or anything like that. And quite honestly, at the time, I totally was living with anxiety. I didn't know it.
Yeah.
That hum of anxiety was just my normal. So
So
it was
often
like,
the case, though, right? I mean, the same thing with our trauma. We've discussed this before, right? It's just kind of living inside you, and you don't know why you're all screwed up.
You don't even know it, right? Well, at least I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I was, again, experimented here and there, but really, so I got my medical marijuana card after my cancer diagnosis. Again, the cancer thing is like such a stamp in my life.
Yeah,
of like
of course.
Before cancer and after
Of
cancer.
course.
And quite honestly, so along with my cancer diagnosis and like the shit show of chemotherapy, and it was aggressive chemotherapy for me because I had ovarian cancer. And so I had like a full hysterectomy and oophorectomy, which means like I have no ovaries, no uterus. My whole reproductive system got yeeted into the sky.
Yeeted. That's such a weird way to talk about cancer treatment now. So basically my uterus got yeet. Yeah, right.
Well, there was one time I asked my oncologist when, I had one of my checkups, and he was like, "Do you have any other questions for me?" And I was like, "I know this is kind of weird, but like, what do you guys do with like a person's uterus after you like surgically remove it?" And he was like, "It's in a bucket."
It's in a bucket. Yeah.
It's in a bucket in a medical facility. And I'm like, all right.
All right.
So I joked that I wanted to have a band called Uterus in a Bucket.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, but because all of that was removed from me, I went into surgical menopause, which means I like dove off the cliff into menopause, which means, I don't have the estrogen and progesterone levels and testosterone levels that normal women my age would have. And I have a lot of friends who are like in perimenopause right now, or like going into menopause. And they're like, "Oh my God, what's going on with my body?" And like, "Did this happen for you?" And I'm like, I'm not the person you want to talk to about your experience, because I literally woke up from surgery and I was in menopause. And so, because with all that and the anxiety of my cancer diagnosis and like all the things, I was on massive steroids, and that kept me up. And so I was averaging like 3 hours of sleep a night. It was
brutal.
It was brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, and this was months of my life.
Wow.
And like, I'm trying to function on 3 hours of sleep. And like, I would take like 2 doses of Benadryl and I would wake up I was a mess.
Yeah.
So anyway, the first time that I had medical marijuana, I slept for like 9 hours straight, didn't wake up. Like Kevin, my husband, almost started crying because he hadn't seen me like sleep like that in, months. And he was just like, "Oh my God," I felt like a new person.
Yeah.
I've never had, an infant to take care of, like for months on end and like not sleeping.
Right.
But I can imagine this is what like new parents feel like. It's rough. So it really does help me in a lot of ways, in particular with sleep, because I go through these terrible bouts of insomnia.
Mm.
And it, it helps with some anxiety for me. Like I feel like it gets me really present. And it feels like sometimes like Nora without anxiety.
Yeah.
So like, oh,
Yeah.
this is what the real me's supposed to feel like. But again, it's I don't use it all the time, but I do. I'm open to cannabis, like for recreationally, not just because I need to sleep or anything, because it can be a different experience
Yeah.
in your day to day. It can be a different experience with music and concerts and food and all that stuff. So
And sex and everything else. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
exactly,
pretty
exactly.
amazing that
So
way.
yeah,
And also, I was going to say it's the reason I like to do it when I'm being creative is it makes me much more patient with process, and
yeah,
because I like the end result as much as the next person, but it really makes me slow down and take my time with I upcycle a lot of stuff, and a lot of that is taking apart something that you don't know how it works and then reassembling it into something that it's not supposed to be originally intended for, which is like a challenging process sometimes. And I find that cannabis can really I'm just much more curious and much more patient and much less in a hurry to get to the end result. So that helps me a
yeah.
lot.
And I think the difference, the other is this. I'm glad I wasn't really like diving into all different types of drugs, including cannabis, when I was a teenager,
Yeah.
because my brain was still developing,
Yeah.
right? And as a 40-something-year-old woman, I definitely have a different state of mind going into these types of experiences than I would as like a 18-year-old. So,
Yes. Yeah, for
I
sure. I
want
mean,
to
we should mention that. I mean, that is a big deal, you guys. If you're a younger listener, it's like it's going to be very different for you. All the experiences we're talking about, the drug ones,
completely.
the drug induced ones anyway, than it will if you're in your 50s, or in your 40s. Something like it's a whole different bag. Like I did smoke weed when I was in junior high and high school just to try it a few times. Did not like it at all. Completely different experience in my 40s when I happened upon it. It's all about where you are.
Yeah, and I also say that like the states that where it's legal, whether it's recreational or medical, those are regulated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I had friends in high school that would like go to terrible neighborhoods,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the Philadelphia area to score weed, and sometimes it was like laced.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
could be laced with angel dust or whatever, and
Whatever.
like like that. No, I'm good. That was just like always kind of like I know that, and I don't like to put things in my body that aren't regulated.
It's such a 70s. It's such a 70s, early 80s reference. Though, like weed laced with angel dust. It's
I
like
don't
it makes you so old. Like who laces? Is PCP even around anymore? I mean, I don't think
I have
that
no idea.
I have no
But if you
idea.
listen to the Beastie Boys,
Right. But
they have their era of angel dust.
I remember that there's a show called The White Shadow. Did you ever watch that about this white? It was about a white basketball coach in a black school, basically. And there was a whole episode on like PCP laced marijuana, and they called
Like
it
after school special.
Yeah, it was sort of like that, but it was like every episode was a weak morality play, basically, of this thing.
Right.
But I was like 10 and I loved it, So, but there was an episode where one of the kids got in trouble with weed that had PCP in it, and like his friend jumped off a roof or whatever because he thought he could
Exactly.
fly. And I just remember, I'll always remember, they called it gorilla biscuits. It was just what weed with laced with a piece. Yo,
Which
man,
is the name of a punk
you got
band.
any?
But,
I know. Gorilla
Yeah,
Biscuits is the
exactly.
best name for a band ever.
It is.
Anyway.
Yeah, no. And I also just want to say that like growing up in the 80s, oof,
Yeah.
where it was like, you had Nancy Reagan's, Just Say No campaign everywhere. And then
Yeah.
you had, and then you had This Is Your Brain on Drugs,
Yeah.
like commercials.
Yeah.
If
All the
you're
scare
old enough to remember
tactics.
this.
Yeah.
But also, we grew up in the era of like crack cocaine and like all sorts of like when I was in college, I went to an affluent university, and there were kids just freaking strung out on heroin that would like show up at parties, and it was like, oh man, this is not good.
Yeah.
So the amount of like drug use that was around me, and not because I was choosing these, it was just around.
Yeah.
There were young people.
Every
who were,
college at that point. Yeah.
every college, but like not even just college, but in the cities too.
Yeah.
It was a real time.
It was a
Let's
real
put it that
time.
way.
I mean,
This shit
listen,
was real.
by the time we were 16, we were doing cocaine for sure in high school.
Well, I wasn't, but
No,
but
not
yes.
you, me. No,
I know.
I mean, I agree. Of course, I was in high school, and I'm older than you, so Yeah, I mean, there were any number of drugs available to us,
Yeah.
and lots of people did them. I stuck to the ones where I could still feel like I was in control. That was one thing that was
Yeah.
important to me. So I felt
Hmm.
like with alcohol and cocaine, I was still, in fact, I was super in control, right, or whatever. So that's like
Hmm.
that's where I started my
You know,
drug journey.
it's kind of messed up that like in high school it was easier for kids to score a plethora of illegal drugs, including coke and whatever the
Hmm.
hell, than it was for alcohol, which
Oh yeah,
was what many kids in my high school just like love to drink in the woods
yep,
and
yep,
get chased by cops, but it's just that's saying something,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for
Anyway,
sure. Anyway,
we'll move on.
all right, let's move on, shall we? So
Yes.
next up, we got the big guns here. We're going to talk about psychedelics.
Psychedelics, which is having
Psychedelics.
its moment.
Yeah, it is
uh,
having a moment
yeah,
right now.
psychedelics are really having its moment right now. You know, uh, I haven't tried any psychedelics yet. That being said, I've read plenty on them. I'm kind of fascinated by the power of what they are, like organizations like MAPS and like
Hmm.
different people are researching in terms of alleviating anxiety, PTSD, depression. There's a lot of stuff, research coming out on psychedelics, different types of psychedelics that are real promising
Yeah, there was just
for
a
people
study
who are.
released on LSD that is probably going to widen the availability for other researchers of
Mm.
LSD because it was I'm just doing this from memory, folks. Sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me. But it was something like 90 days out of a one dose.
Mhm.
It was still like it was a high number. It was like 86% of respondents still said they had, you know, no recurrence of their anxiety or something like that. And
Yeah,
it was incredible what the results were of this test. And yeah, I
it's
believe
really
it.
interesting. I read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, and
Hmm.
I think
Yeah,
there's like a
great book.
Netflix series on
Yeah,
it. It's a great book. It's very
good
dense
series
in the
too.
history of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It really puts in before the Nixon era,
Hmm. Yeah.
the amount of research that was going into psychedelics, and then the Nixon era just kind of put a big old squash on that, and we're
Tricky Dick started the
just
war on
picking up
drugs,
now.
kids. In case you didn't know where the war on
Yeah,
drugs came from, that's all Tricky Dick Nixon. Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, but the book I found pretty fascinating. What really like again grabbed my attention about all this
Hmm.
when I was reading, there were a bunch of clinical trials of different psychedelic therapies for different people, including cancer patients
Hmm.
as well as cancer survivors. So
Hmm.
I, as an ovarian cancer survivor, first off, ovarian cancer is one of the highest recurring cancers
Hmm.
to get. So how that usually happens for people, women and people with ovaries who get ovarian cancer, typically they're diagnosed in later stages.
Hmm.
And the first time around, there's no test for it. And then what usually happens is there's a surgery and chemotherapy that people go through. And then usually there's a time where it's like, oh, so and so, quote unquote, beat cancer.
Yeah.
And then it recurs.
Yeah.
And it usually keeps recurring until people pass away from it.
Yeah.
So it's, I kind of live with the anxiety of I've had quite a few friends die after several recurrences with it. It's a really terrible disease.
Hmm.
So that's part of the anxiety I carry as like a cancer survivor. Anyway, when I was really intrigued, I read Michael Pollan's book in a newspaper article about a clinical trial where a woman who had ovarian cancer and was cancer free at the time went in for a clinical trial because she just had so much anxiety about a recurrence. And I don't know if they give her psilocybin or I think it was psilocybin.
Hmm.
Anyway, when she went in like into her trip, she saw basically the cancer
Hmm.
as like a black orb in her body, and the person who was guiding her, basically she was terrified of it, and they were saying like, no, lean into it.
Hmm.
And she explained she was also a self-proclaimed atheist.
Hmm.
She said that like she kind of started shouting at it and telling it to leave her body, and this was representing like the anxiety about it. And after her trip, she said that she's no longer afraid of recurrence. She's not afraid of death.
Hmm.
She's like basically believes in a higher power
Hmm.
that she experienced. And she was like, it took one trip and I have not had any anxiety about a recurrence again.
Yeah.
And that to me, I was like, oh shit, on one trip.
Yeah.
Like, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible, man. And they say there are no atheists in foxholes. There are not a lot of atheists that are on psychedelics either, I gotta say. Like,
I
I
can
feel her.
imagine.
I
I
feel
can
her on
imagine.
that point. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Anyway, it's that was like when I read that, I was like, this is really intriguing and
Yeah.
this is powerful stuff. So, but let's talk about Paul, you have some experience with psychedelics.
I
So
do.
let's I want to hear all about it. So
Okay. Fire away, Dr. Phil.
fire away.
I'm
All
always
right.
excited to talk about this.
Well, we'll
Yeah.
start with psilocybin or
Okay.
magic
Magic
mushrooms.
mushroom, psilocybin. Yeah, that was the first one I did. I first started with a pretty mild trip. I did like 2 grams the first time, somewhere around there. And then I was at about almost 4 grams the second time I did them. So they're pretty different trips, but both a lot of information in both. But I found that compared to LSD, I found that the mushrooms for me was much more of a couch locky type thing. Like I might, well, first of all, let me talk about intention, because that was very important, I think, when you go
Yeah.
in, right?
Setting.
Setting and intention. So it was important to me that I set my intention before I did it, because first of all, I don't like being out of control, right? That's my thing. That's why I chose the drugs I did in my youth. And so it took to gin up the bravery to do psychedelics, to be like, to let go. It was quite a long lead up to me deciding to do them. And this is recent, y'all. This is the last 2 years I started doing psychedelics. So when I finally got there, my intention was, okay, it's not recreation. My intention is education when I go in, right? So I want to, my intention, what I would say before I go into myself is like, okay, teach me what I need to know, show me what I need to be shown, and that's really all I ask, and there. So that's how I went into it. So mushrooms, got eye shades on. I had some tones playing in my headphones, like 528 kilohertz tones, and some other tones that were sort of musical in the background. And I'd say about an hour and a half in, I started to really come on. And while I was, and this is the heavier dose trip, because more happened in that, but I saw a lot of different things. And they were, first of all, I saw my own death, which I didn't see how it happened, but I saw my own corpse and all that. And it wasn't a big deal. Like, there you are. I mean, it really felt like when I meditate, observing a thought, when I was on mushrooms, I was observing this corpse. It felt like the same separation. It really feels like, okay, there's a large S self that's not part of this body. Like, I really am a spiritual entity having a human experience, like the old chestnut that everybody says. But I really felt that when I was looking at my own corpse, and then the other thing that happened on mushrooms that was really striking was that I saw my parents at the time of my birth, and how worried they were about being parents, and how unprepared they were. And like, my dad is 30, my mom's 25, and they just had this kid. They're both happy, but they're both obviously ridden with anxiety, and this whole play kind of happened in front of me. And it happened, I think, because I needed to find a lot more empathy and forgiveness for my parents in the way that I was brought up. And it worked, man. They became really human to me, and not like this wall that I had been knocking against for a long time. They became just a couple of confused kids who were like, well, I hope we do a good job with this, And
that's incredible.
It gave me an incredible amount of empathy for them. And I was, crying during that part. And then the other thing that I saw when I was there, which is a much more abstract thing, I saw a couple pretty abstract things. One was like a cube. I want to say it's floating in space, and I think it was presented that way so my tiny human mind could wrap my head around it. But it had all these little light dots of light that were going up and coming down, and they were leaving little trails up and down and up and down. And I came to understand that this is the regenerative nature of life itself. This is the coming into creation was going down, and going back to source was going up, and all these things are happening all the time. And there's not a good and bad to any of those things. That's the other thing. I got to this point where I really felt like there's not a good and bad. Like, death isn't bad, life isn't good. Like, all this, all the stuff that people say, well, if there was a God, why does he let this happen in the world, or whatever?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, it's not that. It's just this endless generation and re-emergence into the source, and I really felt that at that point. And man, did I feel connected to a higher power at that point in the trip. I just felt like very
That's
taken
amazing.
care of. Like, here's the slideshow. Here's exactly what you need to see. Like, here's the PowerPoint of how all this shit works.
Right.
And it was amazing. It was
That's
amazing.
incredible.
Yeah.
I have a friend who did an ayahuasca trip.
Mm-hmm.
And
Haven't done that yet. I really want to. Haven't done it.
oof, have fun puking and shitting.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
You know what?
Is that the way you send all
ayahuasca-
your friends into psychedelic trips? Ooh, have fun shitting and puking.
No,
You're
I'm
such a
very
good trip
intrigued by-
such a good trip sitter.
I'd be amazing.
Right. Oh, Nora, can you trip sit me? I'm thinking about doing mushrooms. Sure. Have fun freaking the fuck out.
Note to self:
I'll be right here in case you
Never.
need me.
if you're listening to this, never ask me to be a trip sitter.
Never ask Nora to
Apparently,
trip
it'd be
sit.
Terrible. No, I was gonna say that he did an ayahuasca trip, and I think from what he has said, he just spent hours just like having a panic attack
Oh, yeah.
because he thought he was gonna die.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the things that like people always say that going to psychedelic trips is to like just let go of
Let
control.
go.
right?
Yeah, absolutely
And
true.
I don't know what that's like. Like
Yeah.
I emotionally don't know what that's like.
Yeah.
Theoretically can understand what he was saying, but I can't imagine just, spending hours on end waiting for a drug to wane so that I didn't think I was
Yeah.
gonna die.
Yeah. I mean, I knew that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just about to ask like any advice on that. on
Yeah.
that specific
Yes.
thing.
Yes. And that's a really good thing to bring up. I knew I had advice from friends and the internet about
Mhm.
that going in, and so I felt like I was well prepared. You'll see some stuff that may scare you. That's the thing.
Right.
But don't be afraid of that, though. That's really important. Like, if people are thinking about doing this, and I'm not advocating it, but if you are thinking about
Mhm.
doing it, it's not. There's a way through the fear in it, right? And the way through that
Mhm.
fear is to let go. So it wasn't all like scary stuff. Like he said, he was having a panic
Right.
attack for 2 hours. But if you hold on to any one thing in there, it will just keep showing you that thing. And
Mm.
so that's where the panic comes from, right? Is that
Got it.
when you're shown something, you just got to release. Like when I saw my own corpse, I was freaked out because it's me, right? It's me. It's obviously me, but dead. And I'm like, what is going on?
It's
My
your
ego.
body, it's not you.
Yeah,
Paul, it's your
right.
body.
But my ego is flipping out,
Mhm.
right? Inside of me.
Exactly.
And the mantra when you're in there is just let go, release. And then
Mhm.
soon enough, you're on to the next thing, and
Right.
and one thing that's great about mushrooms that I didn't find with LSD is that I could still take notes, right? I could take notes that would sort of make sense to me afterwards so I could remember some of the important things. So if something really big happened, like the thing with my parents or the thing of seeing my own death or the thing with the cube, I would be able to remember that later and try to, so that's nice
really
about
amazing.
that. Yeah. But yeah, let go,
Okay.
let go is always the mantra
Yeah.
inside of a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
So how about your LSD trip? Like
LSD
what
was
are the bigger
different.
differences?
Yeah,
I want to know what the differences are.
that was recent that I did LSD. I did 100 mics of LSD, which is basically one hit of LSD. It was first of all, with mushrooms, let me finish the mushroom thing up because
Oh, sorry.
no, it's okay. I just remembered this is important to comparing to LSD though. After about 4 hours, I was coming down on it, and there was both trips. There was a real line of demarcation where like something said to me, "Okay, you can get up now. You can go outside. You can just enjoy the rest of this trip and see the nice colors and all that stuff." I didn't have a lot of open eye hallucinations, so there weren't a lot of patterns. My fingers weren't wavy, like that didn't
Right.
none of that stuff happened to me on mushrooms, right? I mean, the colors were brighter. I did feel more a part of everything around me, as everything is one type of feeling.
Universal kind
Yeah,
of,
universal interdependence, I felt that real strong. And it was beautiful to take a walk at the end of that trip. So like when you're coming down the last 2 hours, it was, I happened to be in a place where I could walk up and I could see the water and there's some trees and it was a nice day. It helps to do it on a nice day. I like doing it on a
Right.
nice day because then I can get outside if I need to. So that was the end of the mushroom trip. The LSD trip, I dropped in the morning like I normally do because I don't want to be up all night with this stuff, So I dropped it not like 9 in the morning or something. And about an hour and a half later, I started to see like some disturbances in my periphery. And then the visual hallucinations or the open eye hallucinations were much more intense with LSD than they were with mushrooms. So I started seeing patterns and stuff. And for a while, I watched some YouTube videos with like fractal, changes in them and they were fascinating, man. You felt like you were in them. You felt like I was swimming through them. It was awesome. It was one of those things where they're slowly coming at the camera, and you're just like, oh, this is awesome. I'm in this fractal. Amazing, kind of thing. But the weird thing about the LSD thing is that I felt really nauseous for like the first 4 hours of the trip. And that's not what I expected. I expect that on mushrooms because you do sometimes get nauseous, when you're eating mushrooms, depending on the kind of mushroom and what you had to eat and how you slept and all that stuff. It could cause nausea, but not with LSD. I was like, this is weird. So, and it just kept persisting like that. And it was okay. It was kind of in the background. I didn't feel like I was going to throw up, right at that moment, but it was nagging, and then it happened in the afternoon. It was the fact that I was holding all this trauma and I needed to let it out, and I went into a crying jag that lasted the better part of an hour, and it was intense. I mean, like my stomach muscles hurt so bad after it because I was wailing. It's like just all of it was coming out. Like, oh my God, dude, all the unresolved trauma around my family dying and like family members dying and things I regretted about relationships, and like all this stuff that was buried in this lump in my stomach was just coming out through my eyes in such an intense way. And, Kat was there to trip sit me, which was amazing. And I, before it happened, I said, I think I need you. I don't think I'm doing good. And I just leaned over the sink in the kitchen and she started to rub my back, and that's when it just all came. And it was like, and I thank God for her, man. I mean, I would have been okay by myself because I knew what it was. It wasn't like I needed to call 911 or anything, but she just held on to me for like the better part of an hour while all this stuff came out, and was like, it was the rock for this experience. And
Kat, if you're listening, thank you for that.
Yes, Kat, thank you for that.
Yeah.
No, she was amazing. And it was the best thing that happened to me on that trip was that release. I mean, hard at the time, but you get to a point, like I remember saying, I was standing in the kitchen, I remember saying, if we're going to burn it, let's burn it to the ground, get it all out, get it all out, get it all out. And then another jag would come. And I just kept doing that until I felt like I was absolutely empty of anything.
That sounds like cleansing and exhausting.
Both. Yeah, both. And speaking of exhausting, like the hangovers are different for the two, right? For mushrooms, I felt kind of logy the next day, a little bit slower, everything like that. For LSD, I just wanted to lie down all day long. Just plan on not doing anything the next day. Well, at least that was the way I metabolized it anyway. But
different from everyone, but
yeah. Yeah, and also that I would say the LSD felt much more speedy, right? It wasn't much of a couch lock. Like it had me up moving around a lot. I wasn't like a sit in place and, trip out kind of thing. I wanted to do things. I wanted to move from room to room. I wanted to go outside. Then I wanted to come back in. Then, I was also clenching my jaw a little bit during it that I found. So it felt like a more speedy experience, although it wasn't twitchy. It just felt a little bit more
amped up.
Amped up. Yeah. And mushrooms felt a lot more like get down and stay down. And I'll tell you when you can get up, that kind of thing. That's what it felt like. Yeah. Yeah. So let's move on to like maybe a more esoteric thing, or it's a little less mainstream than the psychedelics are so of the moment right now, but there's some other stuff going on out there that's really interesting too that can put you into altered states. And one thing that you've done recently that I'm really interested in trying is a sound bath. Can you tell us like what your experience of doing the sound bath was like? First of all, where did you do it, and like who did it? And like tell us all about it.
Well, first the first time I tried to sign up for a sound bath, which I went to Joshua Tree National Park, and I was camping there, and I tried to set up this reservation at this place called the Integriton. And the Integriton is like this kind of like dome building out in the desert that some guy built, I think either the late 50s or the 60s, that has like incredible acoustics for sound baths. And it's, kind of has like the hippie vibe to it and stuff, but I got a little bit of my inner hippie, so I was like, all right, let's check this out. Yeah. But it fills up real quick, and we couldn't get reservations, and I was kind of bummed about it. So I was like, all right, maybe some other time. Anyway, most recently I was in Asheville, North Carolina, and there's a place there that does sound baths on Saturdays and Sundays for like 45-minute sessions. And so I knew I was going down there, and I was there with my husband, Kevin, and two other friends of mine. And so I signed us all up for a sound bath there. And I didn't know what to expect. Anyway, this particular place is there's like a music store that does, they also do like music lessons, and they have like, djembe drums and all sorts of like different instruments. Real cool. And if you haven't been to Asheville, it's a very musical.
It sounds like Asheville.
Yeah, it's like kind of got the hippie vibe.
It does.
It's like there's like tons of fantastic music there. So music is like, central to the culture there. And
It's a great town.
it's a really cool place.
Yeah.
I really dig Asheville. Anyway, it's my first time there. So we signed up for this sound bath, and it's in this place where they have like a back room that is like soundproofed.
Mhm.
And it's basically like they structured it to like have the ultimate auditory experience, I guess. Anyway, the guy that was running it, well, first off, there were all these like mats on the floor, like so that you could lay there, and they turn off the lights, and it's very dimly lit, and this guy basically proceeds to do like a 45-minute sound session where he has Tibetan prayer bowls. I don't even know all the instruments because he had so many different instruments, like a didgeridoo, like all this different stuff that he was playing throughout it. And some of it was melodic, some of it was like, just like simply for the sound. And he would like, it was a smaller room, but he would like walk by with some of the instruments, and you could like feel like the air like flowing like in the air by your, like over you. It was pretty amazing. Anyway, I've never taken psychedelics, but I had an experience there that I'm still processing it. So essentially, in the sound bath, when I was laying there, I had the best way I can describe it is kind of like an outer body experience. Like I was lying next to my husband, Kevin, and we had our pinkies like attached. So it was like we were almost like holding hands laying there. And at one point, I realized that like I couldn't determine where my body began and where it ended. And I couldn't determine where I was touching Kevin. And like it almost felt like a peeling away from my body in this. And I started to have like I'd say visuals, but some of it was visual. Some of it was just like basically like it felt like download thoughts, like thoughts that I wasn't generating.
I'm
right?
hip. I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was weird because like I felt my grandparents, I felt my dad. It was really powerful. I felt different aunts and uncles that have passed on. I saw my old dog, Levy.
Wow.
Who was like my soul dog.
Yeah.
I was laying there for most of the time with like just tears streaming down my face because it was just so intense.
And I'm sure you weren't prepared for that when you came in.
Not
You're
at
like,
all.
oh, I'm going to take a sound bath.
Exactly.
I'm already feel better afterwards. You're like,
Well,
ah.
I did. It was.
Yeah.
It was really overwhelming for me, in the best way, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like laying there thinking like, holy shit, is everyone having the same experience as me? Of course they weren't.
Yeah.
But I remember like what felt like ancestors from Ireland like, that I've never met. Like it felt like so I was there in Asheville as like to celebrate being 9 years cancer free. It was on the date that I had cancer, and in this sound bath I saw different friends of mine that passed away from cancer, and including my friend Ellie, that it just felt like it felt like the message was like, we're still here. That's what it, like the entire thing felt like, we're still here. And also you are eternal, like all of us are. And your body eventually will die, but you don't go anywhere. So it felt real comforting in that way. It was really just this intense experience that afterward I was like, I'm still trying to process it. I'm still trying to like remember what happened, but it was real wild. Wow. It felt very intense and very overwhelming, but in the best way.
It does really sound like a psychedelic experience in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
It's so funny when you say this stuff too, because like none of this stuff is explainable. Okay, I mean,
No, it's
to
not.
someone else, it's not communicable what you actually go through when you're going
Yeah.
through a psychedelic trip, or what it sounds like you go through in a
Hmm.
sound bath, or even when you're in deep meditation. Like there's stuff that happens to you that's not. It can't be explained with mere language. Right.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And that's why you sound like a nutcase half the time. You
I
come
did,
out
and
these
that's like,
things, you're
it's
like,
hard for me to
I
talk
saw my
about this
dog.
stuff
Yeah, I
because
know.
I know what it sounds like, and I know
Yeah.
that most people are not going to be able to relate. And like I'm trying to understand this, and let alone like trying to have someone else trying to understand my experience is impossible.
Right.
So I just have
Yep.
to trust that my experience was my own and what I needed. And but it like the thing I said to my friends afterward, I was like, I spent years of my life having to go to church on Sundays in a Catholic church. And that one time, that 45-minute session in a back room of a music store
Yeah.
felt more spiritual than any time I've ever been
Oh,
in church. And that's
wow.
to say that like that I'm not trying to diminish what different religions can do for people, but I've just never felt that kind of power in any religious context.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to do a whole podcast about that. I got 19,000 things to say about that, but
Oh yeah.
there you go.
um
Well, that sounds exciting, man. I mean, that's really cool that you did that. I really want to try a sound bath now. And
yeah, I mean, I who knows what the next one will be. The my
yeah.
friends who were with me at that sound bath had actually gone to the one in Joshua Tree, or right outside of Joshua Tree, the Integratron before. And they said it was just very different. Like they were
Uh-huh.
like it was very different, but like still really cool. And the way that they said the place, the Integratron, is like it's so like not just loud but like powerful, the sound that comes through. My one friend, she's like, you feel it in your butthole. I was like, well, thanks for that, but
That's the mark of a good sound bath. You feel it in
feel
your
it in your
butthole.
butthole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's called the
So,
Integraton. I mean, what
I
is it?
know.
What
I
do you
don't know.
expect? Of course, you're going to feel it in your butthole if you go to a place called that. Who names that place? I mean, come
Uh,
on. You're
some
getting too
old
big.
hippie,
But
I'm sure.
right. I was thinking though, man, what a great gig for a didgeridoo player to pick up with some
Right?
sound bath, right? Because where else you're
Right.
not going to play in a band, so you might as well
I
be
gotta
using that
say too,
didgeridoo. Yeah.
if you're going through Asheville, or if you live near Asheville, Skinny Beats, it's called. It's
Hmm.
they do it, I think Saturdays and Sundays. You can sign up. I think it was like 20, $25 or
Yeah.
something like that. I thought it was awesome. I had a really amazing experience, and the guy that ran it was really good at what he did.
Mm,
Like, I actually told him, I was like, "You are doing what you're supposed to be doing,"
yeah.
because you could tell he was into it, and he was trying to provide an experience for people, and I thought it was awesome. My
Yeah.
experience was awesome. Yeah,
Yeah. Awesome, man. Cool.
very cool.
Well, it reminds me also of this Sadhguru quote when he talks. He said this a lot, but he's very fond of saying that our bodies are the most sophisticated chemical factories on the planet, and
Mm,
anything that drugs can do, we can also do with our
yeah,
own bodies. And it sounds like maybe a sound bath that's what's happening. Is
yeah,
you're
maybe.
definitely connecting in the same way. Something about tones, man. I listen to a lot of tones too when I'm meditating,
Hmm.
when I'm doing other stuff, when I'm trying, a lot of these different frequencies, especially 528 kilohertz, and it's different. It makes a big difference. It does.
Mm.
It does something to me. It gets me
Well, I
more
think
focused. It opens me up. It's interesting.
what I find fascinating too is that like all of these drugs, different types of drugs or experiences, are just essentially ways of opening up or closing off different receptors in our brain,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so these experiences are kind of always available to your brain
Yeah.
to process and figure, like to do this stuff. And it's just interesting, like if you take LSD, what receptors it
Hmm.
attaches to, and gives you a different experience. But like again, uh, that's always available.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I
what's
agree.
crazy.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to say that the way I approach looking at these different types of experiences again has differed after chemotherapy,
Hmm.
because I think a lot of the control stuff that I had prior to my diagnosis, like those kind of things that like kind of motivated me to not try stuff, post chemotherapy, I'm like, I've kind of been through the worst drugs
Yeah.
that people can be on for
Yeah.
months on end. Like I
Mhm.
literally was poisoned, on a weekly basis, sometimes with a double dose of it. And the amount of wreckage that put my body through, if I had a bad trip, that's like 4 hours, five
Yeah.
hours, 8 hours, maybe, not 5 months of
Yeah.
what I've already been through. So
Yeah.
I'm a little more open to it.
Yeah, and I would definitely say, bad trips are the exception to
Hmm.
the rule, and the key to those is just keep letting go, and you can turn what you think is a bad trip into just fine. You just need to keep
Yeah.
releasing. All right, well, it's time to bring this in for a landing, I think, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think it might be useful here to give our overall takeaways instead of our usual 3-point landing from our personal pursuit of altered states. For me,
Yeah.
altered experiences fall into two categories. Either they have an expanding feeling or a contracting one, right? Cannabis, meditation, psychedelics, breath work, yoga, sound baths, all that feels very expansive to me, right?
Mhm.
Meaning that it keeps you open. It maybe even opens you further to things you haven't considered for, to the world, keeps your heart open. They feel like they're helping me stay open to the reality of my experience and to move through the world in a more even and kind of a whole way, whereas alcohol,
Mhm.
speed, opiates, other prescription drugs feel very contracting to me. They feel like they close me off to experience. They feel like they're there to temporarily fill the potholes in my soul road, with,
Mhm.
but then they're gone, after that. They're salves, they're band-aids, they're temporary fixes that often leave me worse than they found me, So my
Mhm.
policy is if it's non-addictive and feels expansive, I'll definitely give it a shot.
Mhm.
If it's, addictive and it feels contracting, or even if it just feels contracting, I want to stay away from that. Right.
Right.
All these things we're talking about are not physically addictive either. Right. Psychedelics,
Mhm.
I don't see how anybody could get addicted to psychedelics. I mean, oh my goodness. After you have do an acid trip, I mean, I know there are people out there that are like, well, I want to see what happens if I take acid 10 days in a row. Well, you're going to
Oof.
be really tired and it's going to be awful. But,
Oof.
it's one of those things. You go in, you get the information, you come out again, you wait a while, and then maybe in a few, like first time I did mushrooms, I waited 4 months before I did them again.
Right.
And just did LSD. I'll probably wait 4, 5, 6 months before I do that again.
Yeah, I don't think like ayahuasca is something that someone's going to be doing at a party when you basically puke and
Yeah,
shit
no,
everywhere, and
not
then like,
not at all. No,
you know,
like, oh,
so
hey guys, want to
not
go
a
to disco and do some
recreational party drug.
DMT, right?
Yeah, like hell's no.
Let's go out dancing and do some DMT. It doesn't happen. You'll be falling on the
Oof.
floor, right? So, but
Oof.
I've learned a lot about consciousness, about myself, about consciousness in general, about I think the way the universe works,
Mhm.
and from the downloads that I've had and the things that I've seen, and I'm just so grateful that I was able to give up my control freak nature to
Mhm.
muster the courage to walk down that path.
Right.
How about
Right.
you?
Yeah, I think you nailed it with the contract. I can't speak. I think you nailed it with the contracting or expansive kind of framework. Another thing for me is safety.
Yeah.
That is a safe environment. That is your physical, mental, and spiritual safety going into any experience of making sure you're not unwell.
Hmm.
That is surrounding yourself with safe people,
Yeah.
and just, safety first, always. And if you don't have all those things, don't do it.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. It's been really important to me to have a trip sitter every time that I've done
mhm,
it. Like, I probably didn't need it. I didn't get in so much trouble that or get so weirded out that I probably needed one. But it was so great to know, and maybe that's why I didn't get in trouble, because I knew Kat was in the other room.
right,
And
right.
and on the LSD trip, I was very grateful to have her go through that crying jag with me, to have her
Mhm,
there just holding me and rubbing my back and telling me it's going to
mhm.
be all right, and bringing me back to earth when I needed to before the next wave came. It was very good to do
It's
that.
huge.
So I definitely would not do it by yourself unless you're a super experienced psychonaut, and even then I'd have reservations.
Yeah. I also um this isn't pertaining to what I think one should be, either the mental state or the physical state or the environment, the set and the setting. All those things are
Yeah.
definitely important. This is something I just find fascinating is like what is it, the stoned ape theory? Is that correct?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
like, if you don't know about this, as I understand it, is the theory that whatever monkey species of us were before we were considered human, um, that those monkeys probably picked up some sort of hallucinogen, maybe magic mushrooms, ate that, and then developed a consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the theory that like where consciousness started
Mm.
is in that theory that
Where
there were some,
consciousness of self started is what you're
exactly,
talking about.
that's what I mean. Right.
Yeah.
And or yeah.
Yeah,
I find that fascinating.
I think that's a theory that Terrence McKenna threw around a lot. And Terrence McKenna is an interesting cat to listen to if you're interested in this stuff. He was way out there. He's passed away now. It's been a few years, but yeah, he was very much a psychonaut and was into DMT and ayahuasca and magic mushrooms and LSD, all that stuff. And he's a very hyper intelligent dude. And there's a lot of his recorded stuff on the internet, and people have made podcasts out of it. And
Oh,
whatever.
also, I also wanted to say that Kevin and I started watching a while back this series called Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a Vice.
It's a Vice series. Yeah.
Yeah, and it follows this guy. His name is Hamilton, who is a chemist who's brilliant. He's like I think he's brilliant.
Yeah.
But he travels around to different places. He's a psychonaut, and he essentially tries different psychedelics in different environments and records his experiences with it. And then a lot of time he goes into the lab to synthesize it.
Yeah.
But it's a bit kind of fascinating for him. I've never done psychedelics, but to watch this, you get to see different experiences, and that includes the tough ones, right?
Yeah.
So, worth a watch.
Cool. Good recommendation. All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. I think that's we've done all the drugs we can in an hour. So so far, we will we'll check in again after I've done ayahuasca and DMT, and after Nora's had her first psychedelic
fun pooping in that bucket.
I will have fun doing that. All right, Nora. I love you. I got you first. I love you.
Beat me to it.
Beat you to it.
I love you too, Paul.
This time. All right. We'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Bye.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
If you'd like to get in touch with us about anything you've heard on the show, please feel free to drop us an email at ifweonlyknewthenpod@gmail.com.